This tree shouldn't be growing in Britain. Its natural home is a secret canyon in Australia, so secret the government still won't reveal its coordinates. That's supposedly where it stood the best chance of survival. But things turned out the opposite way. A handful of saplings brought to England did something the wild population never managed. They started reproducing on their own, and scientists still can't fully explain why. The species was named Wollemia nobilis, Wollemia after the park, nobilis after a man named Noble. In everyday speech, it was quickly nicknamed the Wollemi Pine. Though the word pine is misleading, the tree actually belongs to the Arboretums, one of the oldest conifer families on Earth, with fossils dating back 200 million years to the Jurassic. The discovery was hailed as the botanical find of the century. The tree was compared to a living dinosaur, stumbled upon by chance during lunch. Botanists flew into the canyon to count the trees. The result was shocking. Not thousands, not hundreds. Fewer than 100 adult trees on the entire planet, and all of them in a single gorge. 4 sites, 1 dot on the map, its coordinates still kept secret by the Australian government. Even the few researchers allowed into the canyon are driven there blindfolded, so they themselves can't identify the exact location. The next step was genetic analysis to see how vulnerable the population really was. It revealed the worst case. The trees turned out to be almost genetic clones of one another. There was about as much genetic diversity as you'd expect from a single tree, not an entire population. That meant one thing. A disease or fungus capable of killing one tree could kill them all at once. Under the International Union for Conservation of Nature's classification, the species is still listed as critically endangered, the highest threat level before extinction in the wild. A species older than the Himalayas, one that survived ice ages and the extinction of the dinosaurs, was now hanging by a thread in a single gorge 80 miles from Sydney. One fire, or a pathogen carried in on a boot sole, and the species could vanish within days. A backup was needed, growing these trees somewhere outside the one vulnerable canyon. Botanists faced a question that had come up before. Where, exactly? To understand why, you have to look at where the Wollemi Pine had been hiding for millions of years. Its canyon is a narrow, deep slot. At the bottom sits a damp, temperate rainforest, a habitat that has grown scarce in a modern Australia that is mostly hot and dry. Rainfall there tops 1,000 millimeters a year. Sandstone walls shield the canyon floor from direct sun for nearly the whole day. The soil is acidic, thin, and well-drained. In the wild, the trees reproduce mainly not by seed, but by suckering. When one trunk dies or burns, a new one sprouts from the same root system. A single root system can support up to 40 trunks at once, and each individual trunk can live up to 450 years. What looks like a stand of separate trees is often one and the same organism, which makes the population's genetic uniformity even more striking than almost clones suggests. The bark on these trees is also unlike typical conifer bark. Dark reddish-brown, covered in bubbly nodules. Botanists at the Royal Botanic Garden. Sydney compare it to hardened chocolate crumble. The tree has another unusual trait. 2 entirely different types of foliage. Young, shade-grown leaves are bright lime green and grow under the forest canopy. Mature leaves that are above the canopy are stiffer and darker, a bluish green. Growth in the wild is slow. It can take the Wollemi Pine a quarter century to add its first 20 feet of height. Of all the Australian Araucariaceae, the Wollemi Pine is the most cold-hardy, and at the same time, the least heat-tolerant. Put a young tree in direct sun and its leaves yellow and scorch, sometimes permanently. This was confirmed by a large citizen science project run by the Royal Botanic Garden Sydney, I Spy a Wollemi Pine, led by Dr. Kathy Offord and Dr. Heidi Zimmer, which drew more than 1,500 responses from around the world. The trees fared best in cool, damp conditions, roughly between 3 and 25 degrees Celsius, with above-average rainfall. The researchers noted specifically that Wollemi pines do particularly well far from home, as far away as the north of England. In the wild, Wollemi pine seeds have a single wing that helps them ride the wind. But in a narrow and closed canyon, this does almost nothing to help genetic diversity. Most seeds simply fall back into the same gorge they came from. The reason is simple and absolute. The Wollemi Pines' upper temperature limit is around 35 degrees Celsius. Above that, the tree starts to suffer. Across most of Australia, that kind of summer heat is normal. In southern England, it is a once-in-several-years event, headline material. The tree did not need to learn to live in Britain. It simply recognized a climate it had lost 100 million years earlier. The first 2 Wollemi Pines arrived at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, back in 1997. But the real experiment began in 2005, when a batch of young trees was sent from Australia to test cold tolerance. British botanists expected cold to be the main challenge. The trees were planted in plots with varying soil acidity, and observation began. But frost turned out not to be the problem. With proper shelter from wind, the Wollemi Pine handled British winters just fine. The real issue ran deeper, into the soil. Trees planted in acidic, well-drained soil grew noticeably better than the rest. These were the same conditions found at the bottom of the Australian canyon. That same October in 2005, another commercial chapter of the story unfolded. The Sotheby's auction house in Sydney put up 292 first-generation saplings. The logic was straightforward. The more Wollemi Pines growing outside the wild canyon, the fewer reasons for anyone to go looking for it there. Every single tree sold that day, raising more than $1.5 million. More than 400 bidders and onlookers showed up, enough that some stood outside the tent itself. Every lot sold without exception, earning the sale white glove status, a rare distinction Sotheby's Australia had granted only once before in its history. The top lot, a collection of 15 trees named for Sir Joseph Banks, sold for $149,000. The following spring, in 2006, the Wollemi Pine went on public sale and appeared for the first time at the Royal Horticultural Society's Chelsea Flower Show. Hundreds of thousands of saplings spread around the world, a good share of them settling into British and Irish gardens, where the climate suits the tree best. Early buyers were picking up their trees from garden centers before Christmas that same year. Demand was such that a single British garden center sold nearly 200 trees at £100 apiece. In 2008, the scientific trials wrapped up, and the trees were moved to a permanent display in Kew's Arboretum. From there, they grew faster than botanists expected. By the early 2010s, the tallest specimen had passed 6 meters. In 2009, marking the garden's 250th anniversary, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, planted one of the Wollemi Pines near Kew's orangery. Just a year later, in 2010, Kew gardener Tony Hall spotted something on these trees that no one in Britain had seen before: seed cones. The tree hadn't just survived, it had started reproducing. Collecting seed that year didn't work out. Wollemi pine cones opened fast, scattering their seed within days. Hall noted it in his diary and came back the following year in time. In 2011, the tree produced 25 cones. 6 that were collected yielded an average of about 187 seeds each, though only roughly a tenth of those proved viable. The seeds were sown, and the first shoots appeared 42 days later. These were the first Wollemi pines grown from seed on British soil itself, rather than brought over as saplings. Let's add up what all this amounts to. In the wild canyon, fewer than 100 adult trees. 4 sites, 1 gorge, 1 fire away from the end. Survival. There is a yearly struggle against drought, fire, and time. In Britain, Wollemi pines grow at Kew, at Wakehurst, at Bedgebury, and in private gardens from Cornwall to Ireland. Some are climbing a meter a year, others, in the cooler woods of Wakehurst, about 30 centimeters. The trees are producing cones, seeding themselves, building up a seed bank. What costs a tree a hard-won struggle in the canyon happens on its own in Sussex, harvest after harvest. Australia had sent its endangered treasure to Europe for safekeeping, not the other way around. Then in 2023, the direction reversed once more. More than 170 young Wollemi pines, grown at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney, were packed up and shipped by sea to Britain, to Bedgebury, the National Conifer Arboretum in Kent. That October, botanist and television presenter James Wong planted 6 of them in the ground. The rest were distributed to 28 botanical gardens across Britain and Europe. This gave rise to a meta-collection, a single population spread across the continent like an insurance policy, with the goal of capturing, by 2034, nearly all the genetic diversity still remaining in the wild canyon. The point of the meta-collection isn't simply to scatter identical saplings across different gardens. Each tree shipped from Sydney is descended from a specific, documented wild ancestor, so the entire network of 28 gardens together forms a living genetic archive of whatever diversity still survives in the wild. If the wild canyon population ever needs to be rebuilt from scratch, botanists won't have to rely on a single source, but on a collection spread across Europe with each tree's lineage precisely documented. 28 gardens from Kent and Sussex to continental Europe mean 28 separate homes. Now, wiping out the Wollemi Pine takes more than one bad week. For the first time in millions of years, the species' fate no longer rests on a single dot on the map. How well this network was already working became clear within just 2 years. In the summer of 2025, at Wakehurst, Kew's Wild Botanic Garden in Sussex, 15 of the first Wollemi Pines brought to Britain are growing in the Coates Wood section, alongside eucalyptus and Southern Beech. The tallest trees there have topped 8 meters, and the nursery team has been tending them for more than a decade. That summer, the trees produced cones more densely than ever before. Botanists call such a surge a mast year, when a plant suddenly produces a harvest many times larger than usual. The causes of this phenomenon still aren't fully understood. A team led by nursery manager Faye Davis collected 168 seeds compared with a typical year's yield of 20 to 30. Of those, about 134 turned out to be viable. This made it possible, for the first time, to deposit seed collected at Wakehurst itself into the Millennium Seed Bank, the world's largest wild plant seed bank, located right there in the garden. Davis called them remarkable trees, adding that the team had now become part of securing their future. The event coincided with the seed bank's own 25th anniversary. These seeds joined an existing collection gathered at Kew back in 2011, part of which has recently been germinated, with the seedlings now in the care of the bank's nursery. Separately, 6 young Wollemi Pines are also growing at Wakehurst as part of the same meta-collection. Add up everything growing in British gardens, nurseries, and collections, and there are now more living Wollemi Pines than remain in that single wild canyon. The meta-collection is coordinated by the Royal Botanic Gardens Sydney together with Botanic Gardens Conservation International and Forestry England, a network of botanical institutions spanning dozens of countries. The backup has outgrown the original. And here's the question that complicates the whole tidy picture. If the tree is better off and safer in England than at home, whose is it now? The question gets sharper once you remember that back home, it's still under threat. During the Black Summer fires from 2019 to 2020, flames came right up to the canyon's edge. The rescue was kept secret until it was over. Air tankers dropped retardant in a ring around the gorge, and a special team was winched down by helicopter to install an irrigation system. For days, the smoke was so thick no one knew if the plan had worked. New South Wales Environment Minister Matt Keane said they waited, holding their breath. The grove survived, but some trees were burned, and 2 died. 2 out of fewer than 100. The Gospers Mountain Fire, which came right up to the canyon that season, ultimately burned more than 512,000 hectares, one of the largest fires of the entire Black Summer season. Despite the danger, the event gave science something it never had before: the first chance to observe how mature Wollemi Pines respond to fire under natural conditions, data now used to plan the species' future protection. Fire isn't the only enemy. A quieter threat lurks in the soil: Phytophthora, a water mold that rots roots, against which the Wollemi Pine has no defense. It spreads on the soles of shoes. That's exactly why the canyon's coordinates are classified and why outsiders aren't permitted to set foot there. A single contaminated boot sole could undo what millions of years couldn't. To hold the threat back, botanists regularly treat the soil around the trees with phosphonate compounds. This slows the fungus's spread, though it doesn't eliminate it entirely. And here's the sharpest point of all. Research shows the biggest future threat to the Wollemi Pine isn't cold, it's heat. The very same global warming that makes the tree thrive in cool British gardens is making its home canyon hotter, drier, and closer to the next fire. The climate that's saving the British trees is killing the Australian ones. So the British trees may go on living indefinitely, while the wild canyon could still burn to the ground in a single dry week. And if that happens, the world would barely notice. The tree wouldn't disappear. It would keep growing in Sussex, in Kent, in hundreds of gardens, alive and homeless at the same time. What are we really preserving? The tree or the place it belongs to? Right now, as you're watching this, trees older than humanity are quietly growing up in Britain. At Coates Wood, Wollemi Pines are shedding cone scales onto Sussex soil. At Kew, someone is logging this year's branch growth in a notebook. In the Millennium Seed Bank vault sit 134 seeds collected in the summer of 2025, frozen, alive, ready to wait out the decades. For the first time in the species' history, its future is ensured not in a single gorge, but across 28 gardens on 2 continents. But the most interesting part is what nobody knows yet. Until recently, nearly every Wollemi pine on Earth was a clone, a copy of a handful of wild trees. Now British gardens are raising a generation grown from their own seed, with new combinations that never occurred in the cramped wild canyon. Meanwhile, an international team has already sequenced the Wollemi pine's full genome and found a surprise. A substantial share of its DNA consists of ancient transposons, mobile genetic elements that built up actively over millions of years. Scientists are now searching that genome for even a trace of difference that might help the species survive disease. It's painstaking work. When virtually every known tree is practically a clone, finding even one useful variation means comparing millions of letter pairs of genetic code in search of rare mutations. But mutations like that could one day reveal whether any Wollemi pines carry natural resistance to Phytophthora, the same mold threatening the wild canyon. If such a tree turns up in even one British garden, it could become the foundation for saving the species where it was born. No one has seen yet how tall a Wollemi pine grows on British soil either. In its native canyon, it reaches 40 meters. Here, not yet. Most of the trees haven't even reached adulthood, and no botanist can say what a century of English soil and English rain will make of them. And they have the time. The Wollemi pine lives 500 to 1,000 years. The saplings James Wong planted in Kent's soil in 2023 are, by the standards of their species, newborns. They'll still be standing long after we and our grandchildren are gone. 3 men once climbed down into a canyon and, without meaning to, raised the dead. 30 years later, those dead trees put down roots 11,000 miles from home. And by all appearances, it's there. Under a gray sky the tree had long since written off as foreign, that they'll live out their next 1,000 years.